Hi guys, let's go watching. Just before that, subscribe and enjoy yourself. The night enveloped the luxurious mansion, nestled in a flowering garden, and the stars illuminated the majestic walls and beautifully decorated windows. This peaceful silence was broken by the clatter of heels. A girl was running through the corridors of the mansion. She ran as fast as she could to the large, elegant door number 7. Abruptly opening the door, a beautiful young girl with long pink hair ran into the room. She called out to her young master. The next moment, a digital voice informed the girl that she had failed to protect the target, that Mr. Diane Redford was dead, and that the cause of his death was the poison, achillesia, and heavy bleeding. It was over. The girl was very angry when she heard this, and then, with pity and sadness in her voice, she began to cry out that it was all the fault of the damn moonfish. She was referring to Mr. Diane because moonfish meant bad swimmers who could not overcome a strong current. It's the year 2010X. Virtual reality games have become fashionable, and what the girl is playing now is very popular among her peers. Young Masters of the Monster Manor, Raising an Angel is the name of this game. In it, you choose one of the young men who resemble angels living in a cursed manor. And the goal of the players is to protect the young master from evil spirits and monsters and try to make him a great man. The incredible details of the game proved that its creators did a great job. Beautiful visuals. Players can choose their own field of activity, of which there are more than 30 types. Maid, teacher, priestess, hunter, distant relative, etc. Even our heroine, who was not very interested in such things, could not resist. She began to play as a maid working in the estate, and chose Mr. Diane Redford to play the role of her young master. Mr. Diane Redford is a handsome young man with silver hair, but this young master was too much like a moonfish. His appearance was to the taste of our heroine, but she had to start all over again. Although it seemed difficult at the very beginning of the game, because it was very easy to die, I chose it because I liked it the most of all. The girl should have immediately guessed why it was called impassable, but she didn't give up. Once she got her paycheck, she would start the game all over again. Each time she told herself that this time she would succeed and that she would be able to help him live to be 16. Sighing heavily, she accepted the fact that the young man had died again while she was away. Several times she asked him to stay on the bed in a safe area. She did not understand why he had gone outside and crossed the Yoden River. And then the girl heard an eerie voice rejoicing in the death of her young master. Looking up, she noticed a dark figure in a black cloak with a hood. The stranger continued talking. With a sneer in his voice, he noticed that she was alone again, and to relieve her of her loneliness, he offered to kill her as well. This made the girl very angry, and she waved her fists and drove the shameless shadow away. The game menu appeared, offering the choice of whether to save the game at 214 episodes or to quit. Looking at it, the girl wondered if it was really time for her to leave the game. She was complaining that the game developers were real scoundrels because she had been playing the game for so many years and couldn't finish it. She decided that she would really stop playing, but her eyes caught something. It was the body of Diane's young master. He was lying motionless among the flowers, and his face was radiant. The girl quickly looked away. She tried to mentally compose herself, because this time she really needed to give up all attempts, and again her gaze rested on Mr. Diane's beautiful face. She sat down next to him and kept looking at him, wondering if she would have the courage to leave him. She was in despair because really, how could she leave him? The girl gently ran her fingertips along Mr. Diane's cheek and told him not to worry, that next time it would work. She cheered up. She didn't care what kind of attempt it was, but he had to live. And then the eerie voice sounded again. He wheezed that if the girl really did not give up her attempts to help, then he would entrust it to her. At the same moment, thorny vines began to envelop the heroine. She could not move and did not understand what was happening. The thorns were wrapping around her body more and more. The only thing she could think of was that it could be a program error. In other words, a bug. When she woke up, she saw that she was in one of the corridors of the mansion. The sun's rays, penetrating through the huge windows, filled the most remote corners of the room. A maid appeared. She addressed a girl named Rin and invited her to the door. The girl was surprised and assumed that this was the beginning of the game and that she had been thrown to episode 1 due to a bug. They stopped in front of a large, ornate door with the number 7 on it. The maid at the door said that Diane's young master had a new tutor. Behind the door, an angry voice asked why they had come so late. Rin thought about it when she heard that she was introduced as a tutor. After all, she had started the game as a maid. How could things have turned out this way? The door was opened. In a room flooded with sunlight, he stood by the open window, Mr. Diane Redford. Turning around, the young man asked unhappily, how could they be 5 minutes late? And without taking his eyes off the girl, he added how irresponsible it was for her first day and that she should perform her duties properly. At this moment, Rin's heart almost jumped out of her chest. She had seen this scene with the young master in the game 44 times before, but she was as moved as she was for the first time. The maid apologized to the young master and explained that there had been a mix-up that had made them late. Then she turned to the girl again and introduced her to Mr. Diane, who would be Rin's care from now on. Mr. Diane asked the girl's name again and asked about her surname. As soon as the maid was about to tell the master Rin's last name, the girl exclaimed, "Logout!" So Rin tried to get out of the game because she did not like such mistakes. The room fell silent, and everyone felt uncomfortable. Mr. Diane asked Rin Logout if she was from the north, as she had a distinctive way of speaking. Upset, Rin simply replied that it was not her last name. She was disappointed that she couldn't get out of the game. And then it hit Rin. If she was thrown into the very first scene in the game, then this scene must start somewhere. The girl quickly grabbed a large vase that was standing nearby and, shouting for everyone to duck, threw it at the maid. Shrapnel flew. Mr. Diane was shocked and covered himself with his hands. The maid turned into a scary monster with sharp teeth, sunken eyes, and long claws. This is how the first scene in the game begins. The stunned Mr. Diane sat on the floor and kept his eyes on the monster. He looked at what his maid had turned into and whispered quietly, "Moros." That was the name of the monsters in this game. Rin, on the other hand, noticed that there were sabers hanging on the wall as a decorative feature. She decided to use them to complete the level. But before she did, she grabbed a sheet and covered Mr. Diane with it. She couldn't let her dear Mr. Diane see that. As soon as the sheet came down on Mr. Diane's head, the monster roared and Rin reached for her saber. In 2 jerks, Rin finds herself in front of the monster and easily kills it with a single swing of her saber. This is not surprising, as she has already gone through this scene 43 times. But something was wrong. Rin's face and clothes were covered with something red. She stared at the slain monster in confusion and couldn't understand why the blood wouldn't stop. Usually, defeated monsters looked quite neat and covered with flowers, but now there were rivers of blood everywhere. Rin was bewildered and confused. She didn't know what to do if Diane-san saw all this. What was going on anyway? Peeking out from under the covers, Mr. Diane asked if the girl had killed the monster. Rin, in turn, was deep in thought. She remembered that last time corpse flowers had bloomed around the murdered maid. They literally mean what they say. They bloom on corpses. When a person dies, they bloom red, but when pestilence monsters die, the flowers are black. The maid turning into a frostbite, the smell of blood, the scent of corpse flowers. It was all too realistic. Rin suspected that a strange bug in the system might have caused this. The girl's memory flashed back to the words she had said to the deceased young master Diane that he would definitely survive the next time. And a hoarse voice instructing her to do something. Based on this, Rin wondered if she had been transported to the world of the game. Silence. Rin and Mr. Diane were sitting at the table, and the maids were bustling around. One of them said that they would soon clean up, so they asked Rin and the young master to wait in the guest room. The girl agreed and asked them to take their time. Mr. Diane looked depressed and did not look at Rin. Noticing his state, Rin asked the maid to hurry up and clean up. It seemed to her that Diane was quite frightened. Previously, in a similar situation, she would have simply switched to another episode of the game and forgotten everything. But because of the bug, she couldn't do anything and didn't know how long it would last. Mentally, Rin kept trying to call up the game menu, giving different commands and repeating the exit command incessantly, but to no avail. She assumed that it was some new bug in the system and was annoyed because no one was giving an explanation. There was silence, and again it became awkward between the couple. Mr. Diane was also shaking a little. Rin was worried that he was afraid of her. She wanted to reassure the young master and explain that she was not a bad person at all, but she couldn't. He was too distant. The girl was also sad. She turned to the maid and asked her to bring a vase of holy water and warm tea. A few minutes later, the table where Rin and Mr. Diane were sitting was decorated with a beautiful vase of flowers, and tea and cakes were served. The fragrance of flowers filled the room, and it became warm and sunny. The maid handed Rin a towel to wipe her face. She thanked her. As she wiped away the bloodstains, she looked at Mr. Diane and thought that it was no wonder he was so frightened, because it was the first time she had seen such a revealing scene. Rin composed herself and turned to Mr. Diane. She offered to start their acquaintance anew, but was interrupted. A young man came into the room and asked with excitement what had happened. He was told that a new teacher had come to room 7, so he wanted to take a look, and it was a mess. The young man who exuded luxury was Mr. Manuel, the angel of room 2. He was the most popular character chosen by the players. He was also Rin's favorite in room 2. Therefore, every time she lost, she had an irresistible urge to swap Mr. Diane for him. Mr. Manuel asked if it was true that the new teacher had killed Moros. And when he saw the bloodstain on Rin's face, he knew it was true. He was interested in what Rin could do for him and asked her name. But then Mr. Diane called out. He irritably asked Mr. Manuel why he was interested in his teacher. Mr. Manuel replied that he had no reason to get so excited, because it was just a name. Rin was embarrassed. She didn't understand why the atmosphere had become so strange. With an exaggerated expression on his face, Mr. Manuel emphasized that Rin was Diane's first caregiver. That is why he is afraid that Manuel will take her away. And for good reason, because they are on completely different levels. So it's obvious who the girl will choose among them. Mr. Diane was embarrassed, biting his lip and looking away. Seeing this picture, Rin was touched and happy. She realized that young Master Diane did not want to part with her, and for the first time, she was glad that there was a glitch in the game. Mr. Manuel approached Rin and offered to keep Diane and become his tutor. At that moment, Mr. Diane jumped up and shouted that Rin belonged to him. Lightning flew between the young masters. Rin tried to calm the boys down so that they wouldn't fight and would get a grip on themselves. But Mr. Manuel mockingly pointed out that it was Mr. Diane who needed to calm down. In turn, Mr. Diane replied that he was just jealous. And both gentlemen just pouted at each other. The young Master Manuel was the first to calm down, sat down at the table and took the cake and asked Rin who came first for her. He began to praise himself for being famous for his good attitude towards the teachers and assumed that Rin had chosen room 7 only because there were no other options. Wasn't that right? Mr. Diane's face turned pale. And inside Rin, her heart began to bleed when she saw his expression. She told Mr. Manuel that she chose Diane because she wanted to. Diane's young master looked up in surprise, and the stunned Mr. Manuel could not believe his ears and asked if this meant that Mr. Diane was her favorite. Rin was deep in thought. After all, it was really hard to raise Mr. Diane, which is why he wasn't so popular. But it would be too much to say that to a young master. And Mr. Manuel continued to ask her who was in second place for her. Rin, without looking up from her tea, clearly answered that it was Mr. Diane. Mr. Manuel was confused and asked who was on the third. Rin smiled and replied again that it was Mr. Diane. She had once thought about changing her character, but Mr. Diane has always been number 1. Although there are other characters she likes, she didn't have the heart to say so in front of her favorite. With a resolute voice and self-confidence, Rin added that no matter how many suitors she had, she would always choose Mr. Din. And no wonder, because she had already chosen him 43 times, but he kept dying. Dissatisfied with these answers, Mr. Manuel said that Rin had no idea what to make of people, and adding that he didn't need such a misfit, he left the room, slamming the door loudly. The room fell silent again. Mr. Diane was the first to ask Rin if he was really her number one. His face was flushed and his eyes were filled with hope. He was so sweet that Rin's heart beat faster again. Moved, she simply replied that it was true. Young Master Diane beamed with happiness, and he kept his eyes on Rin. And she continued that young Master Diane was the best for her. Mr. Diane asked again if she really thought so. Rin confirmed it. She breathed a sigh of relief because the young master was no longer afraid of her. And Rin reintroduced herself. This time she said her real name, Dorchester. With a warm smile, she added that she would take care of the young master from now on. Mr. Diane, smiling back, also introduced himself. The young master noted that Rin's manner of speaking was more like that of a maid. The girl flinched. No wonder, since she had spent so much time playing maids. But Mr. Diane was smart enough to see the difference. Rin asked Mr. Diane if he didn't mind the way she spoke, that she was more comfortable with it. The young master did not object. And then Rin wondered what educators do. It was the first time she had heard of such a position. If she asked Mr. Diane about it, she would look strange. He looked at her with such trust. So Rin didn't want to let Mr. Diane know that she didn't know what a tutor did, or it might disappoint him. Rin decided to change the subject and find out about the tutor later. Maybe it was another bug or a new option in the game. She returned to the maid's incident. Mr. Diane asked if it was really a pestilence. Since it was the first time he had seen the monster so close, he was very surprised. Then the young master blushed and added that he didn't want Rin to think he was a coward, that he wasn't easily frightened. At the sight of Mr. Diane's ashamed face, Rin's heart began to tap dance again. She agreed that her young master was very brave. Mr. Diane continued to assure me that he was not as weak as he might seem. That last time he was just so surprised that he couldn't do anything. And looking Rin straight in the eye, he resolutely declared that next time he would protect her. Oh, it was a blow right to Rin's heart. She was so touched and grateful for her master's words that she was moved to tears. Caught up in the flow of her feelings, Rin voiced that Mr. Diane was as sweet as a fairy. Mr. Diane was a little taken aback. He asked Rin again if he was the one she had called a fairy. Of course Rin had him in mind, but she decided to be tactful. More discreetly, she explained that it was the young master who looked so much like a fairy that she couldn't resist. Rin wanted to film this scene so badly. It was the first time she had ever seen Diane's young master so embarrassed. It was a pity that due to a mistake in the game, she couldn't take it. So there was nothing left to do but drink tea and smile. A maid appeared. She invited Rin to go to her room since she and her master had already finished getting acquainted. Mr. Diane abruptly got up and said that he wanted to rest, so he was leaving them. Rin was surprised and asked if she could stay a little longer, but Mr. Diane sternly refused. Citing fatigue and a desire to be alone, he escorted her out of the room. The girl noticed that the young master's face was still flushed, so she did not argue. She said goodbye to the young master and went to her room. Once in the player's room, Rin looked around. She didn't notice any changes compared to the previous times, but there was no response from the system. Sitting down on the bed, she wondered how long this mistake could last. Usually, after 48 hours, the system automatically throws the player out of the game. Would she really have to wait all this time? Real time and game time are calculated differently. In reality, 48 hours would be equal to half a month in the game. Rin sighed heavily. She wanted this mistake to be sorted out as soon as possible because she had to go to work on Monday. The voice was in Rin's head again, a hoarse, creepy voice instructing her to take care of something. She wondered if it was really just a mistake. And what if it wasn't? Rin got out of bed. She decided to move around a bit, because when you're not doing anything, stupid thoughts come to mind. She washed her face with cold water, but her anxious thoughts still kept coming. Everything around her seemed so real, as if the game had become a reality. Rin looked in the mirror. Looking at her reflection, she assured herself that this was simply impossible. She was also happy that her face was the same as in the game. The mistake did not spoil it. After all, she had been so careful to adjust all the parameters. The girl decided to look around the room again. Opening the closet, she saw a beautiful black uniform with a gold brooch. This was probably the uniform for the tutor. Then Rin began to look around in the closet. She was looking for a suitcase, the suitcase that all players get. Usually, at the beginning of the game, it was on the bed. It contained weapons, personal belongings, and an instruction book. Rin wanted to look at the book and understand what the job of a tutor was. Rin wondered what exactly a teacher might do, perhaps the same things parents do. Taking the new uniform out of the closet, she noticed that it was special for the position. Why was Rin the only one to get one? In all 43 attempts, this was the first time she had heard of this field of activity. Perhaps it was just added to the game, or maybe that was the reason for the bug. Rin sighed heavily. She felt sorry for her things that she had collected during the game on the previous levels. After all, she even had some limited items. Rin was angry at the game's creators for this as well. She decided to rebel against them if the things she had collected were not returned. After calming down, she decided to go outside and look for the suitcase there. It was a clear day, the sun was shining, but Rin was very depressed. She wandered the corridors of the mansion for a long time and met almost no one. She came across only one maid. Rin asked about the suitcase, and the maid was so scared to talk to Rin that she was shaking like a little rabbit. She told her that she had left the suitcase in the girls' room and was surprised to hear that it was not there. Rin attributed this behavior to the fact that she had killed one of the maids who had turned into a monster. Thinking about the absence of her suitcase, Rin prioritized her needs. She didn't need the instruction book as much as she needed a weapon. Rin noticed something on the wall. It was a huge battle axe. Rin picked it up and tried to figure out how handy it was. She closed her eyes and tried to concentrate, but something hit her leg. Rin looked down and saw a round metal box with an ornament on the lid. She picked it up and asked where it could have come from. At that moment, someone approached. Rin looked up and saw another handsome young man with eyes as blue as the sea and dark blonde hair. It was the angel of room 1, Mr. Ruska. He was looking at Rin with a cold gaze, and in his hands he was holding the same instruction book. The girl was amazed. After all, she could only meet him in the game by choosing a special route, and then there was the book. With a gentle smile, Rin leaned over to Mr. Ruska. She handed him the box and warned him not to let it out again. But someone snatched the box from Rin's hands. It was a woman dressed in a black dress with a short veil over her face. She warned Rin not to come near her child. She looked Rin in the eye with a fierce gaze. Rin felt uncomfortable. She knew who the woman was and why she was looking at her so hostilely. The girl explained that she only wanted to return what he had dropped, to which the woman angrily replied that it was up to her to decide whether to pick up what had fallen or throw it away. After all, it is not known what the girl had done with this thing. So how could she give it to the child? Rin was shocked that the woman was accusing people so easily and without any basis. The woman, in turn, turned to Mr. Ruska and they left. Looking after them, Rin sadly noted that there were still characters like that. She noticed that it was the first time she had seen her. Maybe she was a new character, but she was too rude. Nevertheless, Rin was satisfied. As a veteran of the game, it was interesting for her to meet the first NPC and evaluate the new content. The girl went to the backyard of the estate. There, among the trees and bushes, she found a sculpture of a lion. Rin picked up the sculpture and found a hiding place with a revolver in it. It was her hiding place. Rin had planned to use it in episode 10 of the game, but decided to change the course of events a bit. She heard a loud laugh nearby. She turned around and saw 2 shadows moving among the trees. Rin quietly approached. Sitting in the bushes, she heard 2 children talking. They were laughing about someone named Cheshi falling into the pond. Rin became interested because it was the first time she had heard this name, but she decided not to get involved. Since she had found the weapon, it was time to go back to the mansion, especially since Diane's young master could be waiting for her. When Rin came out of the thicket, she noticed something and froze in her tracks. There was someone standing on the road, tall, wet, with a depressed, dark aura, muttering something. She thought it might be the Moros again, and it was a good thing she was armed. Rin prepared to defend herself when this someone suddenly said hello. He said that he had heard of Rin as she was the new teacher in room 7. She breathed a sigh of relief. He had scared her quite a bit, and it was a good thing she didn't attack him. Rin also greeted him and noted to herself the attractiveness of her new acquaintance. He was a young man, tall, fit, handsome, with light blonde hair. Through his wet shirt, she could clearly see his well-packed muscles. While the young man was removing the seaweed, Rin kept her eyes on him. She wondered, who is he? Could he be a new character? His body was so strong, and it suggested that he was no ordinary worker. The guy came closer to Rin. He was happy to meet her and admitted that he was very surprised to hear that a teacher had finally come to room 7. The stranger asked what the girl was doing here alone. Was she lost? Rin confirmed that she was indeed lost. She couldn't have told him that she had come here in search of an object. The young man was not surprised. Since the estate was huge, it was very easy to get lost in it, especially at first. He kindly offered to show Rin the neighborhood. Rin smiled and gladly accepted his offer, although in reality she didn't need to. She had already passed this mansion 43 times, and it had become her home. Rin then pointed out that his clothes were wet, that he should go and change, and that the tour could be rescheduled for another time. The boy then apologized that she had to see him like that. He was just getting a ball out of the pond for the kids. And then he added with a smile that since it was very warm outside, the clothes should dry on their own. Walking around the estate, the guy finally introduced himself. His name was Cheshi, and he had arrived at the estate a year ago. Rin introduced herself as well, and again noted the young man's extraordinary beauty. Cheshi smiled and welcomed her to the manor. Looking at Cheshi, Rin wondered what his role was. It was the first time she had seen a non-game character, and he might be new here. Turning around, Cheshi asked if he was walking too fast because the girl was a little behind. Rin assured him that everything was fine. Then he said that he had heard the news about how Rin had managed to get rid of the frost on her first day. That she was incredible. Rin nonchalantly replied that it was nothing special because he was alone. Cheshi insisted that he was not, and how she had killed him alone and without help. Rin thought about it. In this game, there are monsters and evil spirits that hunt the young men from the manor. The evil spirits are called demons in Latin, and moros is Latin for corpse, death, and destruction. They are all as dangerous as their names suggest. Getting rid of that maid was not difficult, because Rin had followed the instructions she had repeated 43 times. But even if she told Chesha everything, he still wouldn't understand. Cheshi stared at Rin, fascinated, and was glad that the gossip was true. He had also heard that she had taken an elite course. This is where Rin was surprised. She didn't know what elite course Cheshi was talking about. She decided to ask if they were really talking about her. Cece smiled and confirmed that this was the case. Everyone was interested to hear that a new teacher was coming to room 7, but there was no more information, only rumors. And since the girl was able to destroy the frost so coolly, the rumor was true. Rin laughed. Mentally, she was getting annoyed. Due to a bug in the system, she didn't know the new settings, so she couldn't openly contradict Chesha's words. Some kind of elite course was also mentioned. Apparently, educators were not hired as maids by interview. Cheshi continued his story. He said that Rin was very interested in the other tutors, and if she is really from the elite, she should know the teacher from room 4 very well. The only difference is that this teacher is from Stella. Rin thought Stella was the name of a group of elite educators. Cheshi stopped as if he had remembered something. Then he turned sharply to Rin and asked, "Does she know about the banquet that will be held in her honor tonight?" Of course, this was the first time Rin had heard about it, but she didn't show it. Cheshi said that they would be able to talk about everything there. Rin confirmed that she would be happy about that too. Then someone approached them. It was Mr. Manuel. He was angry and asked Chesa why he was with Rin. Rin felt Mr. Manuel throwing lightning bolts in her direction. He had a look in his eyes that didn't understand why Rin hadn't been kicked out yet. In fact, the young master looked like an angry and disgruntled cat. He proceeded to yell at Cece that he had a lot of work to do and that he should hurry up. Just as Rin was about to ask if they knew each other, Cheshi simply smiled and silently walked away after the young master Manuel. As Rin watched the boys go, she wondered why Mr. Manuel was looking for Cheshi. And then Cheshi turned around. He added that he would show the estate next time. Rin decided to ask Cheshi directly if he was also a teacher. It turned out that he had forgotten to introduce himself properly. So he reintroduced himself and said that he was responsible for the upbringing of Mr. Manuel from room 2. It was getting dark and Rin kept walking along the corridors of the estate. She had the thought that although Mr. Cheshi had been friendly to her, there was still something suspicious about him. She was not too cautious, but rather excited about the new characters. Since she had easily obtained the most important weapon, it was time to return to Mr. Diane. She consoled herself with the thought that the young master might continue to be embarrassed in her presence. Suddenly, someone called out to Rin. She turned and saw a maid running to meet her. Out of breath, she said that they were in big trouble, that something was wrong with Mr. Diane. The girl froze. Everything inside her went cold. She realized that the story of the moonfish had begun. Rin burst into the room and rushed to the bed where Diane's young master was lying. Crying, she asked what had happened. In her eyes, Mr. Diane really looked like a helpless moonfish. Mr. Diane reassured her, saying that nothing was wrong, that he was just a little bruised. The young master looked at Rin and asked her where she had gone, because she was not in the room. Rin began to explain that her suitcase was missing, so she went to look for something. And when she saw Mr. Diane's injured and bandaged leg, she forgot what she was talking about. She started asking loudly how the man could have been injured in such a short time. Diane's young master did not take it seriously. He just said that he had fallen and bruised himself. It wasn't even a wound. Rin knew that Mr. Diane was the kind of character who could easily get hurt. But she believed that nothing more would happen today, since she had already dealt with the maidservant. With a serious look on her face, Rin told Diane that in the future she should always be close to him so that he would not get hurt again. Then she asked the young man if it still hurt and asked him to wait a little longer. Rin turned to the vase on the table next to the bed. It contained a large red rose and the girl tore off a petal. Rin said that it was a horror, not a bandage, and that she would redo it. There was something joyful about this situation. Because Mr. Diane was often injured, Rin had increased her knowledge of medicine and improved her healing skills. It wasn't that there were no doctor characters in the estate, but she didn't trust them. Mr. Diane was surprised. He had never seen this method of bandaging before and felt much more comfortable. Rin thought to herself that due to a mistake, all the settings were lost, so now her healing skills are somewhere around level 1. While Rin was bandaging her leg, she figured she could gain experience points by treating the maids who had injured themselves while out walking. And then she heard that Mr. Diane had fallen on his way to her room. Mr. Diane said that he wanted to go to the holiday banquet together. Rin replied that she was ready to do anything, but that the young master would have to rest today because of his bruise. Mr. Diane did not like this. He began to assure her that he was fine. Then Rin decided to play a little joke. She said that there was a way to go to the feast, but she would have to ask the maids to prepare crutches or a wheelchair. Of course, Mr. Diane didn't like the idea. He did not want everyone to know that something was wrong with him. He didn't want to appear weak. Rin blushed at these words. She was touched that her moonfish wanted to look strong in the eyes of others, and even now he was very cute. The young owner looked down. He said that in that case she should go alone. Rin objected. She could not leave him alone. Mr. Diane replied that he was fine enough to let Rin go. The young host reminded him that the banquet was being held in honor of Rin, so what would happen if she didn't show up? He emphasized that such an event happens only once. Mr. Diane said it in such a desperate voice. But Rin understood his feelings. She was also curious about the banquet, but she had already played the game 44 times. Even if she missed it now, she would be able to attend the next time. But for Mr. Diane, this day is the only one. Besides, he is the only one in this game who hasn't had a tutor for a long time. This feast must have been special for him. The girl thought about it and realized that there was nothing she could do. So when Mr. Diane continued to talk about the feast, Rin interrupted him and said that she would hug him. And that way, they would go to the feast together. The guy was surprised, and Rin explained that if Mr. Diane didn't want others to know about the injury, she had an idea. She would tell everyone that she was so excited to become his caregiver that she decided to go to the feast together while putting him in a carrier. Mr. Diane was petrified with shock. He started yelling at Rin because he was clearly against it, but Rin was just having fun. Then she abruptly changed her expression from smiling to sadness and suffering, and looked Mr. Diane in the eye and said that he was heartless. The young owner thought for a minute, but realized that Rin was making fun of him again, and refused again. But Rin was happy. The evening came. Rin, dressed in her new tutor's uniform, walked down the hall to the banquet venue. She wished she could have persuaded the young master to come along. She could have easily carried him to the dining room. The girl thought that Mr. Diane was much more upset than she was, and how happy she would have been if they had gone together. But she couldn't help it, because Mr. Diane didn't want to appear weak in front of the others. She decided that she would have fun at the feast for the young master and return to him. Moreover, all the teachers would be there, and she would be able to gather more information. Before entering the banquet hall, Rin was greeted by maids who bowed to her. The door was opened and she entered. Almost all the inhabitants of the manor were gathered around a long, decorated table. Rin greeted everyone. She noted to herself that all of them were new characters. Then Mr. Cheshi called out to her and greeted her. Mr. Manuel was standing next to him. Then she noticed Mr. Rusco, also with the tutor, with the same cold look. Further away at the table, opposite each other, were two other young men who just stared at the girl in silence. Rin felt uncomfortable. Given the mood with which she was greeted, she began to doubt that this was a welcome feast. Finally, she was addressed. He was a handsome young man with a bright and charming smile and pink hair. He asked if she was the new teacher from room 7, but he was stopped. The girl sitting next to him had green eyes, dark blue hair, and wore glasses. She called out her neighbor's name, Vivi, and gave him a stern look. And Rin was only too happy about it. She supported Mr. Vivi's guess and introduced herself. Thanks to Vivi, Rin was able to introduce herself, and taking advantage of this, Rin simply sat down in an empty seat. And then she was addressed in a rude voice, accusing her of intending to draw attention to herself from day one. Across from Rin sat a couple dressed in green. A handsome young man with silver hair and golden eyes, and a woman with green hair. She expressed her displeasure. She also asked why the girl had come dressed like that. Rin answered honestly that the outfit was in her closet, so she didn't understand what the problem was. She thought she had made a mistake with her choice of clothes. Then another young man spoke up. Two young men were also sitting next to the green couple. One with brown hair and eyes, the other older, tall, with orange hair. The older one said that the lady was right. After all, first the frost, now the clothes. It really attracts attention. Rin did not understand why they were all so hostile to her, but she kept her head up and smiled. She apologized and offered to introduce herself. It was the first time she had met them, and it seems that they know her, but she doesn't. She then added that Mr. Cheshi was an exception, as she had met him before. The woman with green hair looked down on Rin. She said that since she was an elite girl, she never paid attention to others, so she said she didn't know them. Rin was puzzled again. Today is her first day at work at the manor as a tutor. Of course she doesn't know anyone. Mr. Cheshi came to the rescue. With a sweet smile, he said that the rules at Stella might be different from other places. He had also heard that the process of graduation was completely different there. And since Rin is different from the others, she might not have seen the information from the manor elder. Mr. Cheshi explained that these were just his assumptions, but if they were correct, Rin could confirm it. The girl agreed with everything. Rin thought about what Mr. Cheshi had said. Could he be talking about the system that gives new teachers information about other teachers? That would explain why they were so offended now. But Rin had no intention of apologizing or making excuses. Regardless of the reasons, whether it was a sense of inferiority or superiority, they sat at the same table as the children and allowed themselves to behave in this way. And this, in Rin's opinion, did not correspond to the qualifications of an educator. The room became quiet. Everyone in the room looked at each other. Only Mr. Cheshi decided to correct the situation. He turned to Mr. Raven and said that he had already met Rin, but she did not recognize him. Mr. Cheshi then added that in a private conversation, Mr. Raven stated that he had never heard Rin's name at Stala. Mr. Raven was a young man with orange hair who was drinking wine. He choked on the question. Rin remembered that Mr. Cheshi had said that there was only one teacher from Stella. So it was Mr. Raven. Rin leaned up from the table to meet Mr. Cheshi's eyes. Smiling, she said that she now understood who Mr. Cheshi was referring to during their walk. The girl was thinking, if a player chooses the role of a caregiver, by default, is he or she either a Stella native or not? She needed to observe more to fully understand everything. Rin asked Mr. Raven if he really hadn't heard her name. The young man felt uncomfortable. He replied that although there was only one Stella, it had many departments. Therefore, if he had heard the girl's name, it was only in passing. Then Mr. Vivi's neighbor asked if they should really introduce themselves. Mr. Raven supported her with an action. Rin looked at Mr. Cheshi, who was still smiling sweetly, and she thought that the others were up to something. From what she heard, Rin was able to make the following profiles. Room 1. The object of the game is Mr. Ruska, a calm and cold young man. The teacher is Mrs. Mariana, an unfriendly witch, a sharp lady who looks like a northerner. Room 2. The object of the game is Mr. Manuel, a self-important young man with a sharp temper and a desire to do things his way. The tutor is Mr. Cheshi, a man with a pleasant disposition and beautiful purple eyes, who seems a bit naive. Room 3. The object of the game is Mr. Vivi, a friendly young man who seems nice and gentle to Rin. The teacher is Miss Eugenia, who seems to be a smart girl who likes rules. Room 4. The object of the game is Mr. Leo, a young man who likes to play a little prank. He is very bright and active. The teacher is Mr. Raven, a smart man, but Rin doubted whether he was really an elite from Stella. Room 5. The object of the game is Mr. Sergiu, a calm young man with a quiet character. The teacher is Miss Olivia, a bold witch who seems to hate the elite. Room 6. The object of the game is Mr. J, an intelligent young man, but he seems emotionless. The teacher is Mr. Gilbert, who seems stupid and silent because he doesn't say a word. And finally, Room 7. The object of the game is Mr. Diane, the sweetest, most handsome and charming young man, with eyes as beautiful as rubies and white hair. The tutor is Rin, Diane's maid, whose appearance she has worked tirelessly on. Rin tried to organize everything in her head so she wouldn't miss anything. After all, she would be meeting them more often in the future, so she had to memorize everything. Or maybe the bug would be fixed and they wouldn't have to meet again. At this time, maids entered the hall. They were holding plates covered with lamb. Announcing that today's menu was steak with chimichurri sauce, they placed the covered dishes in front of the audience. Rin tensed. Something was wrong. Then they added that this dish was specially prepared for the welcome feast. The lambs were raised at the same time. Rin looked down at her plate and froze. The maids standing behind her were horrified and turned pale. In a trembling voice, one of the maids said she didn't understand why it was here. Mr. Cheshi was also shocked. Mrs. Eugenia shouted angrily at the maids. How could this happen? Why was there a red corpse flower on Rin's plate? Rin was silent. She knew that a red flower blooms when a person dies, but the flower on the plate was not a corpse flower. It was a similarly shaped flower that had been painted red. The girl didn't know who did it, but she didn't like the joke. Rin smiled. In a calm tone, she noted the interesting way in which guests were welcomed at Redford Manor. The next moment, she stuck her fork into a flower and began to eat it. Everyone present was shocked again. Miss Olivia asked what Rin was eating right now. The girl, not looking up from her dish, asked Miss Olivia, "Don't regular teachers eat this kind of food?" She thought that the guests would enjoy it, since they had prepared so carefully. After finishing the feast, Rin wiped her lips with a napkin and poured some water from her glass onto the flowers that remained on her plate. The paint from the flowers began to spread, and everyone could see that the flowers in the plate were actually white and only looked like corpse flowers. Rin thanked them for the gift, even though she didn't know who had done it. The girl stood up. She said that the audience must have been waiting for her reaction, and they would be very upset if she simply ignored the incident. Then a devilish smile appeared on Rin's face, and she warned the audience to wait for her answer. The girl noted to herself that this game would be much more interesting for the 44th time. It was late in the evening. Rin entered her young master's room. Mr. Diane wondered why she came back so soon. He also asked if the feast was over. Rin replied that she was afraid the young master was lonely. She thought to herself that perhaps she had come back too early, but in any case, the atmosphere in this room was much better than at that table. With an indifferent expression on his face, the young owner assured her that he was better off alone. The girl, on the contrary, made eyes like a puppy and said that she was very lonely without her master. Rin then asked if Mr. Diane had eaten dinner and noticed him glancing suspiciously at the plate of lamb on the table. The girl tensed up. She thought maybe they had decided to play a joke on Mr. Diane as well. Picking up the lamb, Rin breathed a sigh of relief. It was just ordinary food. Since the young master had not yet eaten dinner, she suggested that they eat together. Mr. Diane asked why she had not eaten at the banquet. Rin had to lie and say that she had come back early to have dinner together. Mr. Diane agreed, though he emphasized that he wasn't really hungry. Then they heard the rumbling of someone's stomach. The young owner blushed. He began to assure her that it was not from him. Smiling, Rin agreed and added that the sound was coming from someone named Cute Dianchik. Mr. Diane blushed even more and asked him not to call him such strange names anymore. At this time, Rin took out something and asked the young master to see if it was what he had asked for. It was pieces of cake. The young man emphasized that there were two, just as he had asked. Rin said he could eat both. The young man was embarrassed and exclaimed that he hadn't meant to eat both. He looked at the pieces of cake carefully. Then, after rearranging them and turning them around, Rin saw that it was a heart-shaped cake. She looked up and saw Mr. Diane blush again. It was so cute that Rin blushed as well. She noticed the good taste of the local chef. The girl asked if the young master really wanted to attend the banquet just for that reason. He denied it. He only said that he was just curious to know what would happen if he combined the two pieces. Rin then asked if the young owner was satisfied with the result. When she received a positive answer, she rushed to hug him. She said she was very happy now. Mr. Diane was surprised at first, but then hugged the girl back and whispered that he was happy too. It seemed to Rin that among all the first meetings with him over the past 44 episodes, this was the most important. A new day began. The maids woke up. They cleaned themselves up and hurried to the morning service with the bell ringing. Every day was the same for the hired workers of the Redford estate. Before breakfast, they all gathered in the church and prayed. After that, they anointed their foreheads with holy water prepared on a silver tray. This was done not only to purify the soul and body, it was also done to find out who was a human and who was a pestilence. A quiet whisper spread through the church. It was said that the new tutor from room 7 had killed the head maid, who had turned into a frost. Since no one knew about this, the question arose as to the appropriateness of using holy water. One of the maids, who had freckles on her face, noticed an unusual noise that was not typical of everyday life. In the corridor, she overheard two maids talking. They were expressing their distrust of the new tutor and were concerned that he had already killed a frostbite on the first day. And they were worried that the young master from room 7 would now be able to leave. The girl was called by her name, Sarah Rose. This was done by another maid, Betty. The girls greeted each other. Betty asked if Sarah Rosa was still in charge of room 7. Since she worked in the kitchen, she hadn't had a chance to see the new girl. Betty asked what Sarah Rosa thought of the new teacher. Is she picky? Sarah Rosa didn't know what to say because it had only been 3 days. Then Betty asked if the girl had been assigned anything, and she surreptitiously watched Sarah Rosa's reaction. The girl replied that she had only been asked to borrow some clothes as the newcomer had lost her suitcase. Satisfied with the answer, Betty laughed and said that she didn't know what was going on. Then she wished Sarah Rosa a good day and left. The girl sighed sadly. She shouldn't have waited for anything else. She decided to have breakfast as soon as possible and get on with her chores, such as preparing water for washing. Sarah Rosa was walking down the corridor carrying a large mug of clean water. Suddenly, she was called out loud, and the next moment someone snatched the mug from her hands. Two maids, each wearing a red bow on their wrists, took the mug away and looked at the girl with contempt. Sarah Rosa asked what was going on. One of the maids said that her mistress Marianne was waiting for water, so she would borrow the mug. Sarah Rosa objected to the insolent people because she had prepared the water. Moreover, Mrs. Rin was already waiting for her. The maids did not back down. They didn't mean that they just wanted to borrow it, and they added that it would be an unworthy act of a good colleague if the girl tried to take the water away. The insolent maids justified their behavior by saying that Sarah Rosa was just too stressed because of the new tutor in room 7. And since their master's rooms are on the same level, they can fetch water. With that, they left the girl. Sarah Rosa was upset, but there was nothing she could do. It had been a week since she started working at the estate, and she actually knew that there was an unspoken division of all the workers. Those laborers working for the tutor and the young master, who had the best chance of getting out, looked down on the others. Therefore, they tied a red bow on their arm, symbolizing their master, and oppressed the others. So Sarah Rosa was not in the best position. When she first came to work, there was only room in room 7. She had no choice but to go back and re-prepare and fetch the water. Standing in front of the door of room 7, Sarah Rosa announced that she had brought water for Miss Rin to wash her face. There was no answer. Then Sarah Rose knocked, but no one answered again. The girl decided to enter the room. She opened the door and started to apologize, but suddenly something big and white flew at her. As soon as Sarah Rosa realized it was a tablecloth, she stumbled and started to fall. But someone caught her. When she removed the tablecloth from her eyes, she saw that it was a girl she didn't know. Sarah Rosa thanked her, but she looked very surprised. She could not take her eyes off the stranger. Eyes of an amazing pink color, soft and round face. And then Sarah Rosa realized that this was the teacher of room 7, Mrs. Rin. Rin helped the maid up and asked her if she was scared. She explained that it was because the window had been opened too wide. The girl replied that everything was fine and that she had brought water to wash her face. Rin thanked her. Rin took the mug, carried it to the table with the bowl, and began to wash her face. Sarah Rosa watched with interest. She noted to herself that Miss Rin was so fragile. Will she cope with the job of a teacher? After all, she is the one who is the subject of the most controversy and suspicion. Rin noticed how closely Sarah Rosa was watching her. She smiled and asked if her face was okay. The girl replied that it was fine. However, inside, Sarah Rosa felt that she did not dislike or fear Miss Rin, but rather was filled with something warm and pleasant. It was the 4th day that Rin was locked in the game. Rin had been in a bad mood since the morning. Because of the lazy developers, she had to meet early in the game again. Moreover, the system window was not working either, so she did not know about the arrival of Sarah Rosa. Usually, the system window would tell me who was approaching Rin and what her schedule was for the day. In the past, as soon as Rin saw Sarah Rosa, a quest window would have appeared. For example, trying to increase the favor of the Redford Manor employees, or the message that Sarah Rose is the tutor's maid from room 7, or if you get close enough to the maid to share your secret, she will reveal a hidden quest in return. Since Rin's current level of affection was unknown, such a quest would be useful. The girl was angry. She wanted this mistake to be corrected as soon as possible. The only thing that made her happy was that nothing had happened in the estate yet. Washing her face with holy water was one of the items on Rin's to-do list, and all because of the special rules at the Redford estate. First, wash your face with holy water every day because evil spirits and monsters are present in the estate. Second, if you find a golden button on the floor with blood on it, do not pick it up. Just step on it with your right foot and move on. Third, do not ask or answer anything to a girl dressed in all black in a corridor with purple rooms. Fourth, close all windows before going to bed. Even if someone knocks on them at night, do not open them. Rin believed that these were just mystical things that added atmosphere to the game. But if you don't follow these rules, your power decreases and you become vulnerable to evil spirits. So you have to be careful. She wrote down all these rules in a notebook, which disappeared with her suitcase. But Rin had already played for 44 times, so she had learned everything she needed. When Rin finished washing her face, she thanked Sarah Rosa for the clothes she had borrowed. She promised to wash them and return them. The maid blushed a little and replied that she didn't need it and asked if she could do anything else. Rin looked at the girl. She felt a little bad that there was a distance between them because they used to be colleagues. In the past, they were both newcomers to the estate and became not only colleagues, but also roommates who managed to become friends. Rin was not sure whether she would be able to build such a relationship with the girl again this time. Then Rin remembered something and asked Sarah Rosa if the overalls had any special meaning, that everyone had reacted to her strangely yesterday. Sarah Rosa was surprised to hear this. She explained that this uniform is worn only for the teacher evaluation ceremony, and on the day the teacher is removed from the position for inability to fulfill their duties. Then Rin realized why everyone at the banquet was so concerned about her outfit. But this was the first time she had heard of the grading ceremony, and she thought that maybe they would be divided into classes again somehow. Sarah Rosa saw Rin's face change and asked if the lady was okay, if she had made a mistake. Rin assured her that everything was fine. Rin, on the other hand, was annoyed that there was yet another new thing she had to figure out. Although she was curious about a lot of things, she decided to leave it alone for now, because today is the day when the first episode of the game starts. Wandering the corridors of the mansion, the girl began to remember that in episode 1 of the game, she had explored the Purple Room. On the 4th day after the player arrives at Redford Manor, at night the young master, who is taken care of by the player, begins to suffer from a severe fever for no reason, but the doctor just prescribes bitter medicine, making excuses that the world is cruel, that it's just a seasonal flu that will go away with time. Of course, the fever did not subside. Then a certain rumor began to reach the player. A rumor about a purple room from which the sounds of children's footsteps came every night, and the fact that last night they saw the owner standing in the hallway opposite the same room. And, since the player had been watching his master all night, he began to suspect something was wrong and decided to find that purple room by hearsay. Based on this scenario, Mr. Diane will get sick that night. Rin was not worried because she had played this game 43 times before, and it was not difficult. But the thought of her dear lord falling ill again was heartbreaking. And since this game has new settings, the plot could change as well. Rin noticed a bloody gold button on the floor. Following the rules, she stepped on it with her right foot and continued walking. With a bright and radiant smile, Rin greeted the young master and wished him good morning. Mr. Diane jumped up and down and got angry. He was still in bed and started swearing that the girl had entered the room without even knocking. Rin simply apologized with the same pleasant smile. Although she suspected that Mr. Diane was hiding something, it was something he had hidden under the covers. But by the expression on the young owner's face, she realized that Mr. Diane did not want this to be found. The young man asked why she was looking at him so strangely. Rin smiled. But inside she was feeling anxious. There were a lot of dangerous objects around, so there was a high risk that something could have a bad effect on Mr. Diane. Rin decided to be more cautious and check everything out for herself. She approached Mr. Diane's bed, and then, saying that there was dirt on the young master's blanket, she threw herself on the bed and began to rummage around. The young owner was frozen. He didn't even realize what was happening. Meanwhile, Rin lifted the blanket and saw something. Under the blanket were green beans wrapped in a napkin. Mr. Diane was quick to explain that this was not what she thought, that he had taken the beans out not because he didn't like them, but because he wanted to eat them later. To prove his point, he started eating beans right in front of Rin. Then Mr. Diane began to shake a little and started to hiccup, but he emphasized that he ate everything calmly and that he was not the type to pick at his food. Rin saw Mr. Diane's efforts and decided to play along. She invited the young master to eat her beans, even though she was an adult and still didn't like them. Rin told us how she was forced to eat beans as a child, and if she hadn't overeaten them then, she could eat them now. So if a young host hates beans to the point of tears, he can choose not to eat them. She added that at lunchtime you should enjoy your food, not hate it. Mr. Diane looked at Rin and asked if she would stop loving him if he wasn't perfect. Rin replied that she didn't need him to be perfect. This made Mr. Diane blush a little. Then Rin added that she wanted the young master to just live and not worry about the rest. Mr. Diane thanked her and admitted that he was very happy to have her as his tutor. The corridors of the mansion were filled with maids, who were busy going back and forth on various errands. Then their attention was drawn to a girl who was humming to herself and circling the corridor. That was Rin. She was so happy to find out that her dear white kitten, Mr. Diane, liked her that she could not contain her emotions. The girl greeted everyone who came across her path and smiled charmingly at everyone. She simply greeted some of them, wishing them a good day. She even helped one of the maids to fix the bow on her dress and complimented her eyes. Rin came to the conclusion that the job of a caretaker was the best. Before that, she had considered the job of a maid to be the best because she could touch her pet. But nothing could compare to the work of a caretaker. It was probably because of the upgrade. And then behind her, she noticed a strange scene. 3 maids stood in front of the woman in black clothes, and one of them was on her knees. Rin thought that there must be some new scene in the game and decided to watch from behind a column. The maid knelt down and begged Mrs. Mariana's forgiveness. She assured him that she had not meant to do anything like that and that she would never make such a mistake again. Rin took a closer look. The woman in black was indeed Miss Marianne, Mr. Rusky's tutor from room number 1. She looked sternly at the maid. Repeating the word mistake out loud, she froze for a second and then slapped the maid hard. Rin was shocked. Mrs. Mariana was furious. She said that the girl had no right to ask for forgiveness for her mistakes, as they had almost cost her dear master his life. The maid, with tears in her eyes, began to explain that there was nothing dangerous to the gentleman's life, but Miss Mariana interrupted her. She said that she did not give the girl the right to decide. Then she asked if it could be a mistake that the girl replaced the medication that Mr. Ruska was supposed to take every day. And she added that the courage of such an act was also worth noting. Rin remembered that in the game description, Mr. Ruska from room 1 was labeled with the keyword sickly. Perhaps that was the reason for this reaction? After calming down, Mrs. Mariana said in a steady voice that she would give the girl a chance to be forgiven. She ordered the maid to be sent to the Garden of the Abyss. Only if the girl returned in her right mind would Mrs. Mariana forgive her. The maid was terrified. She grabbed the hem of Miss Mariana's dress and begged her not to do it and admitted her guilt. Rin, who had been watching the scene, turned around and wanted to leave. She felt uncomfortable with the atmosphere. She also thought about the fact that the Garden of the Abyss had never been mentioned in the game before. At this time, the other 2 maids grabbed the guilty girl and dragged her down the corridor. Rin, who was still standing behind the column, was deciding whether to follow them. Since there was still time before the start of episode 1, she followed the girls. Besides, these events were action horror cliches that Rin loved to death. She checked the revolver she had hidden under her clothes. Although Rin was enjoying the game's battles, the possibility of what might happen next gave her goosebumps. Out of the corner of her eye, Rin noticed a figure standing a few columns away, watching her stealthily. It had happened before. She was followed all the way to the room. Ever since she'd been with Mr. Diane, she'd been feeling someone's presence. Rin decided that if the tutors were not supervised and it was the children's class time, then nothing would happen if she watched the maids. The girl ran through the corridors of the mansion until she caught up with them on the way down the stairs to the first floor. Hiding around the corner, Rin saw the maid being led out into the courtyard and dragged toward the big gate. This place was unfamiliar. The maid kept shouting and calling out for Miss Mariana, but no one paid any attention. The door was pushed open and the girl was pushed out the gate. The other 2 maids stayed outside for a few seconds until the screaming stopped and then left. Rin was in awe. It was the first time she had seen this terrifying gate, and it had an oppressive aura about it. This must be the Garden of the Abyss. But something was strange. There were no aromas coming from behind the gate. The girl felt uneasy and disgusted, and the atmosphere gave her goosebumps. Rin beamed. She was looking forward to meeting new characters and exploring new places. Mentally, she said goodbye to the young master, assuring him that she would return soon, and stretched out her hand to the gate. And then she was stopped. The figure that had been following Rin's heels finally emerged from the shadows. Rin turned around and smiled and greeted Mr. Manuel. He was taken aback, but automatically returned the greeting. When he came to, Mr. Manuel was irritated. He was hurt that Rin knew he was watching her, but didn't let on. But more importantly, she didn't know what this place was. Rin replied that she knew about the Garden of the Abyss. Mr. Manuel did not understand the girl's enthusiasm. Knowing that the Garden of the Abyss, she still wanted to go there? Looking at the girl, the young master began to think out loud that an elite tutor could not enter the estate without basic knowledge. Since Rin knew that he was the one who was watching her, did she want to test his reaction? Then he began to say something about a newcomer without fear, about the Garden of the Devil, but his voice began to weaken and his body went limp. Mr. Manuel could only whisper that everything was swimming before his eyes. Rin rushed to the young man and managed to grab his arm and pull him down onto her lap. The young man barely heard her ask for help, as he was losing consciousness. The girl did not understand what was happening, why the young man suddenly felt so sick, why his hands were so hot. And then she froze. For some reason, this situation seemed all too familiar to her. Sitting by the bedside in the hospital wing, the doctor concluded that Mr. Manuel had a cold. Rin noted to herself that Mr. Din should have shown similar symptoms in episode 1 of the game. The doctor then gave him some cold medicine and asked him to replenish the water loss in his body when he regained consciousness. Mr. Cheshi, who was standing nearby, accepted the doctor's recommendations. Rin was furious. She didn't like the doctor's recommendation. She thought he was a fraud. He was a character with a stupid character, and also one of those who were constantly falling in love in this game, which may have been one of the game's mistakes. Mr. Cheshi approached the young master Manuel and gently began to wake him up. He explained that he needed to take the medicine that Dr. Conrad had brought. Then he brought a spoonful of medicine to the gentleman's lips and asked him to drink it. As soon as Mr. Manuel swallowed the medicine, he began to cough heavily. Mr. Cheshi was worried that the young man was getting worse. He began to apologize for not taking better care of the young man. Rin felt that such words were inappropriate because Mr. Manuel was still alive, and they treated him as a dead man. She began to calm Mr. Cheshi down. She said that after the medication, the young man just needed to get some rest, and he would feel better. Mr. Cheshi was still worried. He didn't understand what could have happened because everything had been fine in the morning. He had been taught that children can die of colds, but he did not expect it to be so serious. The girl was surprised and asked if this was Mr. Manuel's first cold. Mr. Cheshi confirmed that the young owner was the healthiest of all, or rather he had the strongest immunity. Rin found this callous assessment of her young master's condition suspicious. She could be wrong, but Mr. Cheshi seemed to be taking the situation too seriously, even if it was the first time Mr. Manuel had fallen ill. The girl began to feel embarrassed by this. Rin pushed these thoughts away because she had also been very worried when her Mr. Diane was sick. Rin approached Mr. Cheshi with the assumption that this was an unusual cold and that there must be some other cause. She asked him if he had any other assumptions. For example, the young master was not his usual self. Mr. Cheshi did not know. Then Rin asked Mr. Manuel directly if he had any idea why he had fallen ill so suddenly. Mr. Manuel had no idea either. Rin smiled slyly at him. She asked him if the young master had broken the rules of the manor. Or maybe he was sneaking out of the room and doing something secretly from the others. Mr. Manuel turned pale. He was about to deny Rin's assumption when she interrupted and asked if the young master had visited the purple room. Had he gone there because of the rumors? It was pointless to lie to Rin. She'd seen it so many times that she was bored with episode number 1. Mr. Manuel, in turn, confirmed that he had indeed gone to the room with a blanket. Because of the rumors about the purple room, the boys secretly went there for reasons that fit their characters. For Rin, this meant that episode 1 had not changed. She assumed that it was not Mr. Diane who got sick, but Manuel, who was sick due to a system error. Mr. Cheshi looked at the young master with surprise. He asked if he had really done everything Rin had said. Mr. Manuel looked away and was embarrassed, but he answered Mr. Cheshi honestly that he had. The young owner admitted that he had indeed heard the rumors, and he had gone to that room once out of curiosity. Mr. Cheshi was furious. Rin noticed that Mr. Manuel's face was flushed with worry, indicating a fever. Since she had figured it out, she saw no point in scolding the young man, as he could have gotten worse. The girl turned to Mr. Cheshi and offered to leave the young master so that he could rest. Mr. Cheshi agreed and said goodbye to the gentleman. The young man, in turn, asked Mr. Cheshi to change his towel and water before he left. Rin was shocked to see that Mr. Cheshi was about to place an unwrinkled, wet towel on the young master's head. She stopped him and kindly offered to help. After leaving the room, Mr. Cheshi asked Rin if she was going to be okay, and she confirmed that she was. After all, they had found out the cause of his illness, and now they had to think about how to solve it. Then she asked if Mr. Cheshi had any plans for the night. He was about to answer, but Rin interrupted him by adding that they would visit the Purple Room together that night, around 12 o'clock. Mr. Cheshi was very surprised. Rin clarified that the meeting place was at 12 in front of the gate of the mansion annex, because he was also worried about Mr. Manuel. She said that the medication was not working, so they should first deal with the doubtful things. Usually, in this episode, the player takes their fellow NPC and they go to the room together. If everything had been as it was before, Rin would have taken Sarah Rose with her, with whom they were inseparable. But due to an unexpected error, new characters appeared. Therefore, it will be useful to adapt to them. Mr. Cheshi said they didn't have a key, to which Rin objected. She took the key out of her pocket and added that she had already borrowed it. The young man wondered how the estate workers could have given it away so easily. Rin smiled and said that she had not asked their permission. Mr. Cheshi was puzzled. She wondered if she was being overconfident, but she had to be brazen to get through this episode. Rin decided to play on Mr. Cheshi's ego. She told him that if he didn't want to leave because of the rumors, he should just trust her. She would protect him. Rin was confident in herself. She had already completed episode 143 times, and even if something changed, she had so much experience that she could overcome any obstacle. Mr. Cheshi looked at the girl with disbelief, but he had no choice but to agree. It was 10 o'clock in the evening. Rin was happy that she had managed to win Mr. Cheshi over to her side, so she decided to pay a visit to Diane's young master. When she arrived at his room, she opened the door and told him it was time to go to bed. Mr. Diane was not alone in the room. He was sitting with his young hosts, Vivi from room 3 and Leo from room 4. The boys greeted him. Rin thought they had come to play with Diane. Mr. Vivi got up from his chair and asked if Mr. Diane understood everything, and since it was time to go to bed, they would continue their conversation tomorrow. With that, the young gentleman said goodbye to Rin and left. Rin was glad that her dear Mr. Diane had friends. It must be the same feeling parents have when their son brings home friends for the first time. But Mr. Diane didn't like the look on Rin's face when she looked at him. He asked her what she was looking at. The girl began to wonder with delight if Mr. Diane had been spending time with other guys before she came along, and that these guys were his friends. The young man replied that they were not close, but rather just acquaintances. Rin lit up with happiness, because it was the first time she had seen the young master spend time with his friends. She suggested that they invite the gentleman over tomorrow, and they could have a meal together. Mr. Diane asked if Rin was really interested in them. The girl did not hesitate to answer that it was most likely true, and quite strongly. This is where Mr. Diane got nervous. In an excited voice, he began to explain to Rin that the gentleman already had tutors, and they had a good relationship. That they have been living together for over a year, and they are unlikely to want to part. Rin said with a satisfied smile that they were somewhat like them. After all, they were also going to live together for more than a year and become an inseparable couple. Mr. Diana blushed. To hide his reddened face, he quickly went to bed. Rin said goodnight to him. She was happy, and she was also sure that her dear young master was safe. The girl walked through the estate to the meeting place with Mr. Cheshi. Along the way, she thought about the fact that Mr. Manuel was sick instead of Mr. Diane, and it made her feel bad. She wanted to find a way to help him. Suddenly, she heard voices. Hiding around the corner, at the gate that led outside the estate, Rin saw a maid and a young man arguing heatedly about something. Listening closely, she realized that the young man was asking for her hand in marriage, and the girl kept refusing. Rin recognized this maid because of her black hair. She was known in Redford Manor for her beauty and arrogance, and judging by the young man's face, he was definitely up to no good, for it was Mr. Raven from room 4. The maid was so tired of being persuaded that she got angry and hit the young man in the leg, so hard that he turned pale and bent over. She said goodbye and left. Rin couldn't help but giggle. Mr. Ravan paled even more when he realized that she had seen everything. He started to explain the situation to Rin, but realized that it was useless and just walked away. It was 11 o'clock. Time to turn out the lights. Rin hid in one of the rooms to leave unnoticed. The mansion was in total darkness. She felt a slight tremor as if something was about to jump out at her. She quietly left the room. As Rin walked down the dark corridor, she thought she should have met and escorted Mr. Cheshi, but she didn't know where the NPCs lived. So she wondered if he might have left her. Rin thought that Mr. Cheshi was not the type to leave a girl alone at night in a ghost lair. And at the banquet, only he had the heart to stand up for her. Besides, Rin had checked on Mr. Manuel again, and he was still not feeling well. When Mr. Cheshi was tending to his master, he looked very concerned. So he will definitely come for Mr. Manuel. The girl went to the door of the annex. She took out the key and opened the lock. And then she felt someone's presence behind her, and it was clearly not Mr. Cheshi. Rin turned around and pointed her revolver directly at the attacker's face. It was Mr. Raven. Mr. Raven was frightened and asked Rin to put the weapon away. The girl refused. Then the captor became completely scared. He said that the girl would not be able to shoot him and live peacefully. Rin explained that she did it in self-defense because he was secretly chasing a lonely girl at night and even got close. Mr. Raven said that he did not expect to get shot for that. The girl tensed up, even though she knew that NPCs could not commit crimes against players, but remembering the existing bug, the guy could be a character who had not passed the system's checks. Rin put her finger on the trigger. Mr. Raven was horrified. He began to explain that there had been a misunderstanding, asking them to discuss it calmly and listen to him. Mr. Raven emphasized that if she shot him, she would no longer be able to stay in the estate, that others would not allow it, and thus she would ruin her life. Rin replied that she wasn't really interested in others. And since he was a member of the elite, he must have known about her abilities. Mentally, she decided to take advantage of the situation and find out, because she still had doubts about Mr. Raven's elite membership. Mr. Raven shook his head. Looking at the way the boy mindlessly complimented Rin, she could tell he was lying. As soon as Mr. Raven tried to change the subject, Rin threatened him with the revolver and asked why he was following her. In response, the guy mumbled something and then suddenly grabbed Rin by the wrist where she was holding the revolver. At first, Rin was surprised by this because it was something new, as the character tried to contact her, and then, with a delighted and devilish smile, she charged the guy's fist right into his jaw. And then, she kicked him with her foot and sent him into space. Mr. Raven bounced to the door of the annex and flew inside the room after landing. Rin followed him in. The guy asked her why she had done this to him, saying that he just wanted to improve their relationship. Rin asked what kind of relationship he was talking about. The guy got annoyed and explained that he didn't like aggressive girls like her. Mr. Raven said that he had received a letter from Sarah asking him to meet her here at 12 o'clock. The day before, she was acting strangely and said he was bothering her. As soon as Rin was about to ask for the letter, she heard the door slamming shut. Mr. Raven asked in confusion why the door had closed by itself and what was going on. The girl realized that they were in trouble. With a disgruntled expression, Rin looked at Mr. Raven, who was still sitting on the floor, and realized that she had started watching episode 1 with him. The room fell silent. Rin knew that they would not be able to get out until they had completed the episode, but she was not sure if it was worth going through it with Mr. Raven. Although Mr. Raven was already trembling with fear. Someone started pulling on the door. Mr. Raven jumped up from the floor and kept asking Rin what it could be. When the door was pulled again, he was so scared that he clung to the girl. Rin asked him not to stick to her and that it was only Mr. Cheshi. Mr. Cheshi's figure approached the window, and he knocked again. Rin began to explain that all the doors and windows were locked, and she could not open them, so he would have to wait. Mr. Cheshi shook his head, and then the girl realized that he couldn't hear anything and began to make hand signs. He nodded his head in approval and remained waiting outside the window. Rin turned and headed toward the stairs leading to the second floor. Mr. Raven followed her. He was surprised that the girl wanted to secretly meet with the teacher from room 2, with their lewd intentions in mind. Rin was irritated. In response, she said that one shouldn't equalize everyone, and that she wasn't happy to be stuck here with such a pervert either. Mr. Raven, in response to the pervert, said that he was not happy to be in the company of an aggressive girl either. So they walked arguing through the dark corridors. Rin thought about it. She found Mr. Cheshi's expression strange, somehow different from his usual one. She also reproached herself for calling him and leaving him waiting. And Mr. Raven was thinking out loud that the only reason this situation had arisen was because he wanted to meet Sarah. Rin asked him if he was sure that it was Sarah who had sent him the letter. After all, she had seen her dismissive attitude toward him. Mr. Raven got angry. He said that the girl didn't know anything about Sarah and that he understood when girls wanted to see him alone. The guy's face changed, and he described Sarah with tenderness. That she was a bit arrogant on the surface, which is why Rin had misunderstood the situation, but Sarah was actually very gentle. Rin didn't believe it, because a gentle girl wouldn't invite him to an annex that was rumored to be haunted. It was hard for her to tell what was well-intentioned. They continued walking down the dark corridor. From time to time, something rustled, and Mr. Raven was frightened every time. After walking a little further, the boy asked why they were going to the purple room. Hadn't Rin heard the rumors? At that moment, a woman dressed in a beautiful black dress with a long black veil and a large gold brooch appeared in the corridor in front of Rin. She asked if they had seen her child. Mr. Raven just opened his mouth. Rin was not surprised. She realized that they were facing one of the main characters of the manor's rules. Don't ask anything of a woman dressed in all black, and don't answer her in a hallway with purple rooms. A woman in black was walking down the hall to meet them. Rin knew that she just had to pass by as quickly as possible. But then Mr. Raven came to his senses and said that she scared him. He began to ask the woman what she was doing here at this time. Had she also come here for him? Then Mr. Raven stated that the rumors about ghosts were just fiction. People just saw the teacher from room 1 here and started spreading gossip. And he noted that the woman walking here really looked like a ghost. Rin stopped the boy. She told him that he was not the teacher from room 1, so he shouldn't do anything stupid. Mr. Ravel just laughed in response. He was 100% sure it was her, because he sees her every day or every other day. Even though the woman had her face covered, he had no doubt. He continued to the woman, asking her why she was looking for the child here. Had Mr. Ruska secretly left his room? The woman asked again in a husky voice if they had seen her child. Rin shouted at Mr. Raven that he could not answer. But he did not listen, and calmly told the woman that he had not seen it. And how could he see if even she could not see? Rin sighed in resignation. Since it had already happened, she had to stall for time. In the original version of the game, the first person to answer 3 questions from the woman in black was cursed. The player would start hallucinating and choking while looking for the item needed to enter the purple room. Since Rin could enter the purple room alone, she began to search for the item she needed. Meanwhile, the woman in black kept asking Mr. Raven questions. This time she asked what color bow her child liked, purple or yellow. Rin knew that the answers to the questions had to be clear. Otherwise, the woman in black would keep asking questions. Mr. Raven was not in the know, so his answers were general. The guy was getting tired of answering questions about bows, and the woman kept asking and asking. And finally, he clearly answered that the child most likely likes a purple bow. And Rin kept looking. She knew that the key she needed to enter the room was under the 4th candlestick to the right of the door. She found it, and the woman in black asked Mr. Raven one last question. Could he get rid of the red flowers that had grown on her child's body? And then the guy tensed up. He turned to Rin and asked her, "Isn't this woman the teacher from room number 1? Meanwhile, Rin was already opening the door of the purple room with the key she had found. She said that she had warned the guy and asked him not to answer the woman's questions anymore and to keep the door open, and she would be back soon. According to the game, the owner of the purple room in the annex of the Redford estate was a boy who died early in life in an accident. The game stated that the ghost wandering around the room was his mother, but the players themselves could not know if this was true or false. The door opened, and Mr. Raven stood on the threshold, shouting at Rin to hurry up because the woman was always picking on him. The girl was already getting ready. Because she knew the game, she didn't have to search the whole room. She found what she came for. She took a purple bow out of the box and wanted to leave the room. But a woman in black appeared next to Mr. Raven and started asking questions again. The boy closed the door in fright. The girl felt the room begin to fill with an eerie aura, so she hurried out. When Rin left the room, she reminded Mr. Raven of her request for a closed door. But he was not in the mood for that. He was already completely exhausted by the constant interrogation of the woman in black. Rin warned him that they had to go somewhere else, so she would go first, and he could leave after another 5 minutes. So we have to be patient. The woman in black stopped talking. She turned to the girl and growled at her to give her something back. That was the end of the episode, which began with a chase. But it was not difficult at all, because it was only the first episode. The woman's husky voice kept repeating that Rin had returned the item. At one point, the girl even felt like a rascal, and she began to school the woman because she was so desperate to get her bow back. But in order to complete the episode, it was necessary to take the bow to the place of the child's death, to the top of the annex. Everything was supposed to end as soon as Rin placed the bow on the chrysanthemums. The woman in black ran up to the girl and screamed in desperation not to do it. But it was too late. A light flashed brightly. The black veil flew off the woman's head. Rin saw a young and beautiful lady with long red hair and green eyes. The next moment, she sees an unknown lady tying a purple bow on the shirt of a beautiful and lively little boy. How he runs and smiles, and the next moment he lies covered in corpse flowers. How a young lady dressed in all black mourns over his grave. Rin stood there with her eyes squeezed shut. They hurt from the flash of light. What she saw was the video shown to the players at the end of the episode, but she thought it was different from what she had seen when she first played. Or rather, whether it was the details of those two that emerged as an illusion. The girl was walking back down the corridor to leave the annex. She did not understand what was happening. Could this be an upgrade too? On the stairs, she met Mr. Cheshi and asked him where the teacher from room 4 had gone. The boy replied that Mr. Raven had run out of the room as soon as the door opened. Rin thought it was out of fear, even though he hadn't seen anything but a woman in black. And Mr. Cheshi came up to the girl and asked, so she was the one who wanted to meet him in this place, so why did she ask about Mr. Raven? And isn't she paying too much attention to that? Rin was surprised because she didn't quite understand what Mr. Cheshi meant. The boy, a little embarrassed, added that he had come despite the fact that the annex was a scary place filled with ghosts, and the girl was talking too sweetly to Mr. Raven. Rin felt uncomfortable because it looked like she and Mr. Raven were on good terms. She assured Mr. Cheshi that this was not the case, and that she had not invited Mr. Raven here, and that he had come to meet someone else. Mr. Cheshi said he hadn't seen anyone. He was alone. Rin smiled slyly, for her hunch that the maid was trying to deceive Mr. Raven was correct. Then, with a relaxed and easy smile, Rin explained that although things had not gone according to plan, the goal had been achieved. She handed Mr. Cheshi a chrysanthemum flower that she had picked from the very top of the annex. She added that if he took this flower, Mr. Manuel would recover immediately. Mr. Cheshi had his doubts. Rin clarified that the flower should be placed at the headboard of the young master's bed and he would feel better. Mr. Cheshi agreed. As she walked down the stairs, she asked Mr. Cheshi if he knew anything about the ghost that appeared in the annex. He thought for a moment and then replied that he knew nothing. Rin questioned whether this was true because people say different things about this place. Mr. Cheshi said that people do say things, but since he hates ghosts, he doesn't know anything. The girl was surprised and asked if he was joking. Mr. Cheshi smilingly replied that he would not have come here if she had not invited him. But Rin was not convinced by his words. She still had her doubts, but she could not continue to ask. The next moment, Mr. Cheshi took Rin's hand and with a charming smile suggested that they quickly head to Mr. Manuel. The lights were on in the hospital wing of the estate. Mr. Cheshi entered the room and greeted the young master. Mr. Manuel was surprised to see him so late. Mr. Cheshi explained that he had come to help the young master recover. Mr. Manuel began to assume that Mr. Shazali and the new nurse were up to something, and that whatever it was useless. Then Mr. Cheshi went to the young master's bedside and said that he already knew it. Mr. Manuel was surprised to hear that his tutor knew. Then Mr. Cheshi threw his suitcase on the bed. The young owner jumped up. He realized what kind of suitcase it was and asked where the boy had gotten it. Mr. Cheshi rebuked Mr. Manuel for doing such stupid things. The young owner asked how the boy had found out about it. Mr. Shazani told him not to talk nonsense. After all, the young owner could not hope to deceive him. It was Rin's suitcase. The young owner was hurt by the girl's words that she would never choose him, so he just wanted to hide her suitcase. But when he stole the suitcase in a fit of anger, he was scared. But there was no going back, so he had to hide it well. Realizing that Mr. Cheshi had caught him red-handed, Mr. Manuel began to make excuses that he just wanted to play a prank on the new tutor. Mr. Cheshi sat down on a chair next to the bed and looked at the young master with a very arrogant look. He said that he heard that Mr. Manuel wanted to change the tutor on the same day that Miss Rin arrived. The boy said he did not know that the young master was so unhappy with him. Mr. Manuel denied it and explained that he just wanted to mess with Diane. Mr. Cheshi asked if his young master wanted to leave the estate. He added that perhaps the gentleman was tired of being a nice boy, so he went on a burglary spree. Touching his finger to Mr. Manuel's forehead, the boy pushed him onto the bed and said that now the young master had to be punished. Mr. Cheshi thought about it. He reflected on the fact that Mrs. Rin had believed that the evil spirits in the annex were the cause of Mr. Manuel's illness. But she was wrong. The young master had broken the rules of the manor and was now being punished. Then Mr. Cheshi soaked a towel in cold water and placed it on Mr. Manuel's forehead. He asked the young master why he had to take such a risk, since he knew he could die, and why he hadn't thought of it for Mr. Cheshi himself. Mr. Manuel looked at the teacher and asked him to forgive him. Mr. Cheshi emphasized that he had forgiven the young master many times before. Looking warmly at the young man, Mr. Cheshi added with a slight smile that he would forgive the young master, but for the last time. The boy told Mr. Manuel that he was bored and was going to quit his job, but now things were getting more interesting. He warned him that he would be very angry the next time the young owner was up to something and didn't tell him about it. Then Mr. Cheshi took out a chrysanthemum flower and showed it to Mr. Manuel, saying that it was a gift from Miss Rin, and since Mr. Manuel did not need it, he asked to keep the flower. The young owner did not mind. Putting the flower to his nose and inhaling its scent, Mr. Shazani thought that he began to like the new environment of the estate very much. A new day has begun, and it began with good news for Rin. Sarah Rosa said she saw a suitcase in front of Rin's room and thought it might be the suitcase her mistress was looking for. Someone must have found it and brought it to the room. Sarah Rosa was very happy about this because it was very difficult for Miss Rin without her luggage. Rin was happy too, because now she could return the clothes she had borrowed from the maid.